Here's a fun fact. Did you know that when the word priority came into the English language in the 14th century, it was singular? The concept of having more than one priority or priorities wasn't even fathomable because having a priority meant the very first or the most important thing. It wasn't until the 1900s that priorities began to be a part of our language, and it became pluralized, where we then now understand to have more than one priority or priorities. I recently came across an article titled 9 Priorities in Your Life That You Need to Focus On. And the first paragraph began by saying, "They say at the end of your life, you will regret the things you didn't do rather than the things you did do." The article went on to discuss the top 9 priorities that the author deemed necessary to enrich one's life by giving it meaning. Living a meaningful life, isn't that something we all strive for and long for and wish for in our own lives? Today's scripture is one you likely have heard before, as it is one of the most beloved and familiar of Jesus' teaching. And I think the heart of the lawyer's first question can be reframed in a few ways for us today. What does my priority need to be while I am here on earth? Where and what do I need to put my energy towards? What will give my life meaning? You see, I believe there is more to his question than just how to get to heaven. Of course, rather than give a direct and easy answer, Jesus responds, "What does the law say?" The lawyer knew the scriptures very well and answers the question by reciting familiar verses from Deuteronomy and from Leviticus, which we today call the 2 greatest commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus agrees with this answer and observes and affirms that observing these commandments will lead to the meaningful life that this man is asking for. Seems pretty cut and dry, doesn't it? The relationship one has with God extends outwards towards others, towards our neighbors. But the lawyer wasn't satisfied and wanted more clarity and was trying to trick Jesus. Perhaps he also was curious to know, am I doing this right? Am I loving my neighbors the way that I'm supposed to? Am I loving God the way I'm supposed to? So he asks the second question that we're so familiar with. Who is my neighbor? I think he's asking, how far does this neighborly love really need to go? How can I be sure that I'm caring for my neighbors properly? And perhaps he is also seeking affirmation that the ways that he's already caring for his neighbors, because as a good Jewish man, he would likely be living out these commands to love God and love neighbor. Perhaps he was wondering if he's already doing it correctly. But rather than give another direct answer, Jesus tells us and tells him the story of the Good Samaritan. One of the shocking elements of this story, which the lawyer and first century hearers of this would have known, but that might be a surprise to us, is that there's a lot of tension between the Jews and the Samaritans. You see, Samaritans were considered social outcasts, and religiously, they were considered heretics. Jews and Samaritans detested each other for over 1,000 years, and they treated one another as enemies. Bickering, division, and mistreatment existed on both sides, and the natural inclination was to completely avoid one another. Most Jews would have even taken a longer route to avoid being close to a Samaritan or even having to travel through Samaria. Jesus, of course, would have known this history and animosity between these two groups, which is precisely why he offers this parable. To help the lawyer and us, I think, see beyond the judgments and excuses that are so easy to make. Who is worthy? Who is not worthy? Who is worthy of my time and attention? Who is not? Who deserves my love? It can sound rather simple. Be nice, like the Samaritan. Don't be mean, like the priests and the Levites who left a bloody, injured man on the side of the road. Help those in need. Rather simplistic, right? Rather simple. But I think that this story is much more than being just simple. And it's certainly not simplistic. For the lawyer and those who lived this division and hatred of cultural norms, the story is really rather shocking and radical. And I wonder if it packs the same punch with us today. Maybe so if we consider that it's more than about just helping the one who's in need on the side of the road. It's deeper than that. It demands, I think, that we as hearers of this story, that we embrace opportunities to practice love for others and perhaps to learn from surprising sources how to do just that. Jesus tells this radical story to expand the vision of neighbor beyond those who are in the lawyer's fold, those who are like him, his fellow Jews and family and friends. Jesus shatters the notion that there are labels or categories for those who are and who are not our neighbors, those who are and who are not the people of God, those who are and who are not worthy of our love. The radical truth of this text is that a Samaritan, one hated by the Jews and one who hated the Jews, sees the humanity of the one bloody on the side of the road first. Not the cultural identity, not the label, not the misgivings, not the judgment, not the hatred. And in doing so, he is moved with compassion, kindness, and mercy to then help him. The image of God is reflected in both the one who shows compassion and mercy and also in the one who is in need. Friends, we may never come face to face with an enemy where we are given the choice to help or to walk away. But we do regularly decide who should get our attention, who in our life our priorities should be. We make judgments and decisions about where our time and our money and our efforts should go on a daily basis, sometimes moment by moment. And we make decisions about who is worthy of those things. But what if we leave here today with a renewed commitment and desire to live the two greatest commandments, to love God and to love our neighbor, to shift our priorities just slightly so that in doing so we can commit to seeing the humanity and the belovedness of all that we come in contact with on a daily basis, first and foremost. How and when might we begin to notice need around us if this is the lens of our priorities? How might we be moved to then also receive when we ourselves are in a time of need? Maybe God through Christ comes to us as someone in need, like the man in the ditch. Or maybe God comes to us as the one who shows compassion and mercy to us. The lawyer wants Jesus to define for him who's deserving of his love. That's very clear. And Jesus invites him and us to live from this place of showing compassion and mercy and kindness to all people. Who our actual neighbor is actually much less important. We are called to be a good neighbor to all people, all who are made in the image of God. When we hurry through life and we step away from the priority of loving God and loving our neighbors as ourselves, we might easily miss an opportunity to be a little Christ to someone else that is right in front of us. But when we pay attention, when we acknowledge the nudge or the inclination to help, I'm sure you've all had them, I know I have had them. When we are moved by compassion, we just might see a situation or a person right in front of us where God is inviting us to respond. And in that moment, we do not need to worry about whether the person is worthy or deserving or not. And it may even mean that we turn away from our plans in order to see and respond to a need. That is the work of God's Spirit here and now, bringing God's kingdom to earth here and now, working through each one of us. Suffering and pain exist all around us, and we're invited to be a part of the solution. When we do this, when we pay attention, perhaps when we shift our priority just a little bit, we begin to cultivate and exercise a new muscle in ourselves, one that the Samaritan models for us, to see one another's humanity and belovedness first and foremost. If you want to live a meaningful life, consider how shifting an attitude of judgment or indifference towards others might naturally lead you to offer more compassion or kindness or mercy to others. Fellow Westsider John Iannacone recently wrote a devotion that I think speaks to the heart of this, and with his permission, I wanted to share it again today, because he so beautifully wrote about our human and natural tendency to have tension and feel, and what we see and feel when we have a need and an obstacle gets in our way. And how by shifting his focus and paying attention, not once but twice in the story I'm about to share, he was moved by a nudge of the Spirit to stop and actually offer help. In that moment, he was a little Christ. In that moment, God used him to bless another. John began his devotion by sharing that a number of weeks ago, he had passed an adult male jogger who was leaning against a stop sign, bending from the waist in a repeated motion with his head looking up and his head looking down in rapid movements. He seemed to John that he was in distress. And while John wanted to stop and see if the man was okay, he continued and drove on. I could see the jogger in my rearview mirror, he said, as he drove away. He was leaning over, holding on to the stop sign. He goes on to share that a short while later, as he drove out of a supermarket parking lot, he saw a young woman who stood to one side of the exit holding a large handwritten sign in front of her that read, "Who will help me? I need to pay rent. I have 3 children. I am pregnant." John could see her swollen abdomen through the gap in her drab, unbuttoned, half-buttoned, well-worn coat, as he described, as she stood in the rain without an umbrella. The letters of the handmade sign were dripping a bit. John passed her and looked away, which I think is our natural tendency. I know I have done the exact same thing, and perhaps you can relate as well. He had a car full of groceries, and he was on his way home to have lunch. As he drove away, he thought of the jogger, whom he had passed not too long before, And whether John even knew it was happening or not, his priority began to shift just slightly as he drove 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks away. The nudge didn't go away, as John wrote, and he abandoned his lunch plans for the moment and turned his car around, driving back to the begging and pregnant woman. He writes, "I parked and walked across the lot. I smiled at her. As I got nearer, she seemed even younger than I had originally thought. I said to her that the rain must make her day so uncomfortable. She looked a bit startled," he says, but smiled tentatively. Her face had her straight, short-cut hair lay just around her face. "I gave her some money," he said. Looking directly at her and smiling, John said, "I hope things work out for you." And he went back to his car. He shares, "As I drove out, she smiled again, and she waved to me." John ended the devotion by acknowledging the very real second thoughts and excuses he had made and how he had to think it out. And I think that's the invitation for all of us, to think it out, to decide in the moment, to pay attention to the Spirit. These things do not always come naturally or regularly to us. They don't come automatically. But maybe it will the next time, as John wrote for himself, and maybe it will the next time for us. Like the lawyer, we are all invited to think it out. And when we get the nudge to love our neighbor and shift our priority, if we pay attention, Jesus' words and command to go and do likewise, though they seem challenging and out of reach, though they seem nearly impossible sometimes, they just might be in our reach after all. So today, let's recommit to the great commandments, to love God and love neighbor, and see how God uses you in God's kingdom here and now. May it be so. Amen.